Bring in Frank Isola, New York Daily News, covering the Knicks. Frankie, what happened yesterday?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you have Adam Sandler in studio, John Smalt. They have me on the phone. I'm sure people must be really thrilled that I'm that I'm in that company. I think ultimately Steve Kerr just didn't have the faith in the Knicks organization. Not, he obviously had a ton of faith in Phil Jackson, but once the Knicks, they were only offering 3 years, and finally they agreed to a fourth year. Since when have the Knicks ever fought over money? The Knicks, it's an ATM machine. They basically have at the Garden. They print money over there. That, I think, probably told Steve Kerr that, maybe upper management really didn't want him. And, the Warriors came back with a better offer. And then everything else started to factor in, because he did talk about his, the fact that he lives in San Diego. He's got a daughter that goes to school in the Bay Area, a son in college in California, another son in high school in California. That was also the case 10 days ago when he was talking to the Knicks and the Warriors. And he let the Warriors know that he was more interested in the Knicks. So I think a lot of things obviously changed. I think Steve wasn't comfortable with the Knicks, and I would suggest to you that there are people in the Knicks organization that probably weren't comfortable with Steve Kerr.
Okay, now what's Plan B?
That's a good question, and I think what you just brought up, Phil Jackson against the field, it's pretty interesting because I think that the Knicks would prefer a Phil Jackson coach. I'm sure Carmelo Anthony would probably prefer the Phil Jackson coach. And even Jeannie Buss had told Phil Jackson, you should coach the team. But Phil has said all along that he doesn't want to coach. And I think Phil originally said the process was going to take a while, but I think by now he figured that he would have Steve Kerr as his coach. And there really hasn't been a plan B as far as really anybody knows. Phil does a good job playing everything close to the vest. And now you can start, looking at some of his cronies, guys like Derek Fisher, maybe Tyronn Lue, who played for him in L.A. and has worked under Doc Rivers in both Boston and with the Clippers, maybe Kurt Rambis, Jim Clemens. I know people in New York would love to see it be Mark Jackson, but they still have a relationship with Mark. Not really, so we're still going to hire somebody he doesn't have a relationship with. Just for entertainment value, I would love to see it be Jeff Van Gundy because obviously Knicks fans would go for that. And, Jeff's history with Phil, we used to call him Big Chief Triangle. It'd be a lot of fun with the two of them working together.
Do you believe that's a possibility?
No, I think it would be. I just think it would be fun. It wouldn't be the worst move.
Oh no,
Phil Jackson ever made, and Jeff obviously would know exactly what he's getting himself into. And I think, once again, I like what you said. Phil Jackson against the field. I think it was probably a 5% chance that Phil would be the coach. Now maybe it's a 15, 20% at this point.
Talking to Frank Isola, the New York Daily News Knicks beat writer. I'm wondering what that conversation was like between Steve Kerr and Phil Jackson. What do you think? How do you think it went?
Well, I think it probably was uncomfortable for both of them because I go back to, and I understand it's a little different situation, but when Donnie Walsh was running the Knicks, he wanted Chris Mullin to work for the team, and Jim Dolan, the owner, would not sign off on it. He would not allow Chris Mullin to work there. And, I remember talking to Chris Mullin about it. He said that Donnie would apologize. And, Chris said, listen, don't worry about it. And I'm sure in this situation, too, even though Phil, Steve was Phil's guy, Phil wanted him. But I think, when Steve starts to feel a little uncomfortable that the Knicks don't look like they're fully committed like he thought they would be, and he's probably feeling a little uneasy, I'm sure it was an uncomfortable conversation with him because all along, these two guys thought they were going to work together. They were going to work together in Seattle. If the Sacramento deal had gone through, where the investors from Seattle were going to move the team there, Phil was going to, become the big shot there, and Steve Kerr was going to work for him. And Steve Kerr has been the number one guy all along. So I'm sure for Steve, the appeal for Steve was working for Phil Jackson more than the aura of the Knicks and Madison Square Garden and even the money. And I think when he felt that maybe he didn't have the proper backing from ownership, because as you guys know, Steve had done a lot of research on the Knicks organization. The fact that he works with Marv Albert all the time, Marv, had been, obviously the broadcaster in New York and had a falling out with Jim Dolan. So Steve knew exactly what he was getting into, and ultimately he felt uncomfortable with it.
I can't help but ask this. If Stan Van Gundy takes the Golden State job, does Steve Kerr take the Knicks job?
That's a great one. I think by then it would have come down to two things. Staying at TNT, which is a pretty good gig because, you fly into town on a Wednesday, you do the game Thursday, you go home Friday for most of the season. I think he probably would have ended up on the Knicks then.
Wow.
And Stan Van Gundy it definitely did have a ripple effect, and that one came out of nowhere. And I think Stan went to Detroit because he has more power, obviously, but there are issues with Golden State ownership and management. But Steve has a relationship with those people, where in New York, the only person he has a relationship with is Phil Jackson. And Phil Jackson, for health reasons, you don't know if Phil Jackson at any moment, of a year into it, says, you know what, I really can't do this. Or, if you look at the history, Jim Dolan, 7 coaches, 7 general managers, history tells you that there's a chance that Phil Jackson wouldn't last that long under Jim Dolan. And maybe that ultimately bothered Steve Kerr and concerned him enough where he went and took the Golden State job.
Remember how everybody was trumpeting that, Phil to the Knicks and how great this move was? That seems like that was a long, long time ago, Frank. That goodwill is gone.
No, it does, and I think this is definitely, Phil definitely takes a hit here, and I think it's a big loss for him. And I think it just goes back to the thing about full autonomy. I think full autonomy has a different definition over at Madison Square Garden. They said that Donnie Walsh was going to have it, and he didn't have it. He had it for a short time, but Phil wants to come in. He wants to change a lot of things there, and there's a lot of people there that work for Jim Dolan, and Jim Dolan doesn't want to make those changes. So you can't say that you're bringing Phil Jackson in to run everything, and then you're having a bit of an issue with some of the moves that he wants to make. The culture there, it's been a losing culture for a while, and there's a lot of people who are embedded in that culture there, and it's tough to change it. And I think Phil is sincere in wanting to change it, but I think he's meeting some resistance in the Knicks organization.
Frank, I know you got a busy day. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
All right, Frank Isola, New York Daily News, Knicks beat writer.